Playdead is an independent game development studio based out of Copenhagen, Denmark, who created the landmark indie gaming titles Limbo and Inside. The company was sparked when former IO Interactive developer Arndt Jensen sketched out a secret place to get in the mood for new ideas. As he expanded on these ideas, Jensen attracted the attention of 8 official employees by the time of Limbo's release, including producers Mads Ribro and Dino Patti, and composer Martin Stig Andersen. Through their tiny team, they managed to create the incredibly successful world of Limbo, which released in July of 2010 as the first title in Xbox Live's Summer of Arcade, and became Xbox Live's third highest selling arcade title in 2010, generating roughly $7.5 million in revenue, which they used to slingshot into their next project. Development of Inside began just 3 months after Limbo's release, and later had its own home run reception upon release in summer of 2016. Both games have been nominated for and won several awards, created surreal, terrifying, and beautiful gaming experiences, and pushed for the popularity of short-form gaming as an art. Now, this is our first analysis tying together 2 entirely separate games. And why is that? Because with Inside being a spiritual successor, these games share a lot in common, and their differences and similarities are what make them stand out in the gaming market. And while we apologize for the fact that we most likely have butchered and will most likely continue to butcher every Danish pronunciation in this video, it's time we take a look at those titans of indie gaming. So, what's so great about Playdead's games? Uncertain of his sister's fate, a boy enters Limbo. If you're looking for any more guidance than that, you're sadly mistaken. That tagline is the only solid information that Playdead released in regards to the story of Limbo. The developers left the storyline purposely vague to allow the story to mean something more intimate to every individual player. Only director Arndt Jensen knows his own personal interpretation of the ambiguous ending. Since the game's release, many players have tried to scrape together a sound explanation of what the story means and what all the symbolism in the game stands for. Playdead hasn't weighed in on any of the guesses. However, Jensen has stated that some players have come, as he says, scary close. It's hard to say anything about the story without giving bits of it away, and while those may not be spoilers per se, the biggest part of the story of this game is the journey for every player. And we don't want to ruin that for anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to experience it yet. Basically, all we can say is that you play as a boy who wakes up in the woods, and you begin your mission, as the tagline says, to find your sister. You will challenge your mind and reflexes against both physical and psychological beasts, and in the end, you decide what the story meant to you personally. Just as its predecessor, Inside maintains an ambiguous veil over its true meaning. One could even say that this game leaves more questions for the players than Limbo did. This time, the information you have to go on is, hunted and alone, a boy finds himself drawn into the center of a dark project. Inside begins just as vaguely in a comparable scenario, even exploring similar locations of nature and industry. However, this time, there are other people. Not just a few silhouettes, but real people looking for you and hunting you, and how you fit into their world is a complete mystery. While the story and ending of this game may leave you confused and shocked, playing the game again closes as many questions as it opens. As you dig deeper and deeper into the meaning of each of these titles, you realize how little you know, but how much there is to understand. And while that sounds like a hippie cop-out of having no story, the truth is there are few games that tell such concise stories in such a short amount of gameplay. In terms of genre, Limbo and Inside are puzzle games. However, that classification doesn't do them justice. These games aren't about moving from room to room, pressing buttons and redirecting lights. The puzzles of these games are part of the environment. They are set pieces for you to solve in order to proceed on your journey. Every puzzle is built up from previous mechanics established as you play the game, eventually compiling everything you've seen recently into a single test, pushing your abilities of thought and timing. Playdead called the playstyle Trial and Death, because they wanted to avoid the implications of trial and error, suggesting that a puzzle is just solved by how many times you knock out a wrong answer. Death is part of the games. It's a feature, directly impacting the way you play. You approach puzzles differently with each trial, stockpiling information from previous attempts to avoid punishment. When developing Limbo specifically, Jensen had 3 goals in mind involving mood and simplicity. One of the goals was to keep the controls limited to moving, jumping, and grabbing, in order to restrain a player to simplicity, and build the game around these controls. Inside maintained these same controls, but added more interaction with the environment without having to hit more buttons. Players were now able to swim and hide behind nearby objects in the environment. The world became as big a mechanic as the jump button, allowing player thoughts, environmental design, and hardware controls to all intertwine and take advantage of their relationship. As mentioned earlier, when developing Limbo, Arndt Jensen had 3 goals in mind. Outside of the simple gameplay, another goal was to present no tutorial text to the player. They didn't stop at the tutorial, however. There was an obvious lack of text or dialogue throughout the entire game, forcing a feeling of being lost or without guidance, prompting the player to learn what they can through the environment around them. And though nothing is flat out told to the player, there are more than enough clues to gather in order to make your own conclusions. For instance, when playtesting the game, some players had trouble solving more difficult puzzles. Jeppe Carlsen, lead designer of puzzles for Limbo, remedied this problem by adding more information into the environment, such as sound cues or moving pieces of the puzzles around in the world so that players would discover their existence without spoiling their significance. Several parts of a puzzle, even the part leading to a solution, may not be noticeable until you've explored the entire area and finally understand what you're looking for. Sometimes this even means making brutal mistakes and dying so that you know why a solution didn't work. While dying isn't necessary, it encourages headstrong players to survey their surroundings by creating a moment of, "I didn't notice that before." Inside presents itself in a very similar way with no text, no dialogue, and forcing the player to rely on their observations. Thrown right into a disturbing world once more, you'll begin to notice repeated ideas that pop up in very different ways, subconsciously guiding you towards the solutions of puzzles you've never even seen. With more gruesome animations, death was even less necessary in this title, encouraging players to think before they leapt, but not increasing penalties for the more foolhardy players. Everything is perfectly timed around your solutions, where getting away from the next danger comes down to the fraction of a second. You're always that close to failing, never giving you a moment to become too comfortable. The third of Jensen's developmental goals was to generate a specific mood. The game is simplistically cinematic, not being greedy with the player's attention. The art style of the game was inspired by film noir, remaining entirely monochromatic throughout its presentation. Backgrounds have a blurred, almost tilt-shifted style to them that removes the natural element of the environment, giving an otherworldly sense. Everything about this game was very nitpicky during its creation. In fact, they focused so much on the character that one animator was dedicated full-time for 3 years of development just on the boys' movements and involvement with the world around them. As closely as they paid attention to detail in Limbo, Playdead went even further with Inside. Right away you notice that the character interacts with his entire body, not just his head. All of his actions are more realistic, from falling off of something to approaching an edge. Inside included much larger, more natural shots with subtle color, streaks of sunlight, and great skyboxes and water. The music of Limbo was composed by Martin Stig Andersen, a Danish composer who would later compose the soundtrack for Inside. Andersen focuses on acousmatic music, that is, music without any apparent visual source. Unlike Jensen's goal of arousing a specific mood, Andersen didn't want to tell players how to feel with overpowering musical pieces. Sounds and music are meant to be interpreted by the players. Even recognizable sounds are distorted and blended into the soundtrack to complement the game's visual sense. Some reviewers even claim that there was no music, but in reality, the soundtrack was finely tuned to become a part of the environment, with the music generating sound cues that seem like they're coming from the area you're in, such as the piece in Rotating Room sounding like saws, and Gravity sounding like the timer of a puzzle. Anderson took another step forward in the ambience of Inside. As crazy as it sounds, Anderson routed the music of the game through a human skull to give it a bone-conducting sound. Here is an example of the same piece from Inside before and after the skull aspect. Anderson also worked more closely with the designers to better tie the music and gameplay together. Even the heartbeat of the character changes depending on what you've just done and what location you're in. Limbo and Inside changed up what it means to be minimalistic by blending downplayed visuals and subtle music into a new form of art. Playdead knew what they had their sights set on when they began working on Limbo, and they didn't let anyone change that idea. Many critics and investors encouraged the addition of multiplayer, difficulty levels, and even making the game longer. Playdead felt any of these additions would take away from their original vision. At this time, many indie game developers were pushing for the acceptance of short-form games, relating them to the runtime of movies and other entertainment, highlighting the mindset that larger time investments don't always have better payouts. Limbo was a definite spearhead for this line of thinking, and Inside followed suit with its own advancements on the art form. So, what's so great about Playdead's games? Limbo and Inside are examples of subtle, short-form art in an increasingly oversaturated indie gaming market. While many games focus on trying to outdo each other with the most unique mechanics or the strongest pull towards nostalgia, Playdead's games focus on the personal journey a player experiences through a melancholy world created using a blend of simplistic visual design and a very particular soundtrack. These games are for players who are attracted to the challenge of puzzles and immersion of open-ended stories. For players who want something short and sweet without feeling that something is missing. Everything is neatly packaged together, allowing both games to stand as their own individuals or as related partners. That is what's so great about Playdead's games. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of What's So Great About Gaming, as we wandered through the games of Playdead. If you have a favorite series or a single game that you think is great, leave a comment of your choice and we'll look into it. If you feel there is something about either Limbo or Inside that didn't get enough attention, let us know. We'd love to discuss it with you. If it's important enough, we may even make a follow-up video. Thanks again for watching. Now go play a great game. We'll see you next time.